This is Julia James Davis, and welcome to The War on Beauty. This week's video is going to be a little bit different, but I think it's something interesting to talk about in the context of the war on beauty. So one of the things that I've experienced since beginning this conversation about the war on beauty, which is in a nutshell that beauty has been intentionally and systematically erased from all levels of our society, from our music, from our film, from our art, our architecture, everything, an effort to cut people off from potential connection to God, because beauty is one of the three transcendentals. Beauty is synonymous with truth and with goodness, and is a potent force for potential conversion to God. So one of the very interesting things that I've experienced in all this is censorship. It's specifically on TikTok that I experience a lot of censorship. And I think that makes me think then that these videos that you're gonna see are potentially the most on point ones, especially the things that really stood out to me in what was censored were the religious videos, the videos talking about conversion, the videos talking about Mother Mary, for the most insane reasons, like violence and gore when talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe. What? That makes no sense. And so it really does prove the point that there is an intentional war on beauty, because there's an intentional war on truth that is happening through censorship and through these social media platforms. But now everything has been topsy-turvied, up is down and down is up in our contemporary secular atheistic society. And so it is so fascinating to me to see which topics really rub up against the edge of what you can say versus what you can't say. So with all that being said, without further ado, here are my top censored TikTok videos. I hope you enjoy. Why is everything so ugly? Why is everywhere we go, all of our stores, our advertisements, like everything that we interact with as people in the outside world, our TV, our music, why is it all so ugly? It really feels like an intentional thing. And this is something that matters to me so much because I love art. I love all things beautiful. So I started to think about it, and it came to me after pondering for a while that this is an intentional war on beauty, hence the title of this series. And why do I think it's intentional? I think that there's an intentional destruction and weaponization against beauty to cut people's connection to God off. This is a controversial opinion. I know it's going to be, and people are going to disagree with me, but it just has to be said. So it looks like I'm the one that's going to have to say it. But stop getting tattoos. Tattoos, very simply, don't look good. They don't look good on practically anyone. Okay, nothing to me is worse than seeing so many girls, and it's almost every girl I see now, walking down the street, they look amazing, and then boom, they have like either a random tattoo or a whole sleeve of random tattoos. It has to stop. It doesn't look good. Now we're at a point where a third of Americans are tattooed. This used to be like a counterculture, subversive thing to get a tattoo, but now every single person practically has a tattoo. It is so hard to walk down the street and find someone not tattooed. According to Pew Research, 32% of US adults have a tattoo. That is an almost 10% increase since 2010, and 41% of people under 30 have at least one tattoo. 38% of women have tattoos compared to 27% of men. And 24%, a quarter of all tattooed people, state regretting their tattoos. It's truly like such a statement now to not have a tattoo. Bauhaus style flourished in Weimar Republic until they had to leave with the rise of the new Nazi government, which branded the style as degenerate. And where did these artists and architects go but the United States? And of course, in very, very short order, they became the new default architects for all new federal projects. So here are a list of some of the notable buildings that these Weimar architects designed for the government and for our cities. One is the John F. Kennedy Federal Building, the Chicago Federal Center, the Robert C. Weaver Federal Building, and it's not a government building, but everyone knows this. This is the MetLife Building in New York City. So very interesting. What were the ideals that were behind this? Well, as we know, this is really the architecture of the New World Order, these new ideas that could be portrayed through art and civic design. So after World War II, the United States heavily invested in astroturfing a modern art movement in the United States and around the world. And they did so specifically with art, like paintings and music and literature, through the CIA's covert propaganda operation, which was called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CCF. The CCF and the United States General Services Administration, that is separate from the CCF, but these were things that were happening parallel to each other and pushed very similar ideals and goals. And they were both things that were artistic movements that both these government institutions wanted to push. So the CCF was crafted by the CIA. It was a CIA operation to use modern art to literally be a weapon of cultural Cold War against our enemy number one, the USSR. Despite the American public really not liking this new modern art called abstract expressionism, including President Truman, who absolutely hated it. This new modern art, the CIA saw it as an opportunity to show the cultural power of the United States. Unlike in the USSR, where it was actually illegal to create modern art, so through the power of the CIA, avant-garde writers, poets, musicians, historians, artists, architects, they were pushed onto the world stage and officially upheld as the new amazing wonderkind artists. A main push, I should note, of the CCF were the abstract expressionist artists. This was like their number one thing. These artists included Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, who they were all bankrolling. The CCF had 35 offices in different countries and published more than 20 magazines all around the world. They mounted artistic exhibitions, all in the name of anti-communism. And note, the CIA involvement with the CCF at this time was concealed. But what were the institutions behind this? Because the CCF had to partner with institutions to push out this new art. So a key partner for them was the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, MoMA, which was originally founded by Abby Rockefeller, wife of John D. Rockefeller, the great oil tycoon, along with two other women patron of the arts. And their goal with founding MoMA was to challenge the conservative policies of traditional art institutions. So Abby's son was Nelson Rockefeller, who had served in the United States government as special assistant to President Eisenhower for foreign affairs, and he went on to become the chairman of MoMA in 1957, and he became a key person to helping the CIA, the CCF, stage all the biggest exhibitions with these new bankrolled and pushed artists. One of their biggest shows was the New American Painting, which traveled the world for a year straight to overall like very mixed and negative reviews. People called the new art, which is just splatters on a canvas, or like with Mark Rothko, just painting a canvas black. People called it depressing. They didn't like it. They thought it was ugly. They didn't know what to make of it. So it's just so interesting that the government is intentionally funding this art, which people don't like, and they're spreading it all around the world through these exhibitions as some sort of cultural flex of American freedom on the world stage. Very interesting. So by strong arming and propagandizing their way into cultural relevance via the intelligence agencies, the United States really established abstract expressionist art, modern art, and modernism in general, including the Bauhaus architecture, as the new American style, whether we like it or not. Mother Mary appeared to the children in Medjugorje. What does Mother Mary look like? She is extremely beautiful. The Blessed Mother always comes with angels, and there is a great light before she comes. Do the angels have bodies? And she said, yes, like babies. You can touch them. Have you ever touched them? And she said, yes, I love them very much. And then she goes on to describe Mother Mary comes down from heaven in a golden dress that is emanating light of luminescent gold, and she's surrounded by these baby angels. And when I read that, I was like, that is the most purely beautiful and sweet and amazing thing I have ever heard, that you could not convince me otherwise, that was the truth. Mother Mary is our mother, that she's the most beautiful woman, that is reflecting the pure love of her son, Jesus Christ, and she's here for all of us. 19% of high school graduates are functionally illiterate. The rising rates of illiteracy in the United States is a crucial part of the social engineering that's going on. And please bear with me as I make a point. The reason the Catholic Church produced some of the greatest artists who have ever lived, Michelangelo, Titian, Caravaggio, Da Vinci, Donatello, I could go on, is because the Catholic Church used imagery to catechize and teach an illiterate public. It's a big part of the Catholic catechism, actually, that images can convert and inspire people to deep faith in God. And now how this relates to today, well, the same thing is basically going on, but to negative and unproductive ends. The United States is becoming so illiterate that most people in the near future won't be able to read. The powers that be are crafting the culture around us in the United States by forcing imagery onto the public. Imagery that is depressing, vulgar, violent, and ugly. And to have all of this culture craft be maximally effective, you need an illiterate public. People tend to think that immodesty or revealing clothing is a new thing. However, in post-revolution era France, women were wearing dresses that would make us blush today. An excellent case study for the relationship between atheism and immodesty, and that directly parallels to the crisis of modesty that we are having in the West now. Before the French Revolution, the French monarchy was staunchly Catholic and very aligned with the Vatican, and the fashions of that period were heavy fabrics, big powdered wigs, and lots of adornment. And so when the French Revolution happened, which was at its core an atheistic movement, this period brought a complete 180 in fashion styles. They started wearing a dress called the robe à la grecque, which was made out of semi-sheer muslin fabric. These were often very low cut and sleeveless or had cap sleeves, basically aimed to style women as living Venus statues. Fast forward to now, the West has a modesty problem that is similarly rooted in atheistic values. After the second wave of feminism in the 1960s, women started dressing in a much more revealing manner, which was a stark visual break from the conservative dress codes of the 1950s and before. Our health was taken away from us and is now being sold sold back at a hugely marked up price. There has been this notable rise in fad diets where people are eating either like only meat or only oysters or like a jug of orange juice or putting a stick of butter in their coffee, jumping through every single hoop to avoid the toxins in normal food. There's been this overcompensation to the convenience culture of the past decades where instead of living a sedentary life post-mating every meal, people are now tracking every single biometric from waking to sleep. And some people, famously Brian Johnson, are even trying to defy death altogether through extreme health measures. And in smaller ways, personal health has been pushed as this new luxury for the select few. Think of the editorial level ads from Equinox that look more like something from Vogue Italia than from a nationwide gym chain, or the rise of wearable tech like the Oura Ring, which tracks literally every single marker of your life from blood oxygen to your hormones to body temperature, all in a simple $500 ring. This is all just not normal. We should not have to do this level of work to have the health of like an average American adult from the 1930s. Do you think that this is progress? How do you know whether a piece of art is good or bad? Quite simply, it's whether you have to explain it to someone or not. And yes, there is objectively good and objectively bad art. Beauty is not subjective. Every single person can recognize real beauty when they see it, whether that be an ancient Chinese pagoda or the Grand Canyon or an old amazing altarpiece in a cathedral. What makes it good is that it doesn't have to be explained. You can be anyone from anywhere with any education, and you see objective value in those things of true beauty. Modern art is devoid of all meaning and true beauty because the only meaning that it has is conceptual. It's derivative of hundreds of years of art history conceptualized into nothingness, into non-figurative whiteness, which literally nobody gets or understands except a small group of people with PhDs. Which is why a majority of people now enter a museum and they see a de Kooning or a Pollock and they say, I don't get that, or I could do that myself. And it's true, there's nothing to get and you could do it yourself. What is happening in fashion with pushing this anti-feminine, anti-beautiful clothing designs is following an exact playbook that the CIA implemented after World War II through the CCF, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. The CCF elevated abstract expressionist artists like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and so on. They bankrolled these artists and pushed them to the top of the artistic game, gave them shows at MoMA, which traveled the world. They basically astroturfed this modern art movement in order to show how artistically free and liberal the United States was. This was a part of the cultural Cold War. The reason the United States wanted to push this art that everybody thought was ugly and depressing, this was not a popular art movement, was just to show how diametrically opposite this art was to the art being produced by the USSR. Oil paintings, very realistically portrayed, very classical art. And there was strong rules around what artists in the USSR were allowed to paint. So by the US flaunting that they had these artists that could just paint whatever they want, even if it was super ugly, we were a free culture. International Women's Day, March 8th, 1917, the official start of the Bolshevik Revolution. On this day, thousands of women gathered in Petrograd to protest the economic hardship and food shortages that had gone on, but this ended up snowballing into a protest with everyone joining in, making political demands against Tsar Nicholas. This ultimately led, of course, to the Tsar abdicating the throne and the establishment of what would become the most deadly government in human history. And while International Women's Day was originally established in 1911 by Clara Zetkin, a German Marxist communist feminist, it wasn't until that day in Russia that March 8th became the official day for International Women's Day. But what's really notable about this is that Bolshevik rule brought huge changes for women that looks a lot like modern day feminism. The right to vote, the breaking down of traditional gender roles for women, the right to hold office, the right to divorce, and most notably, the Soviet Union was the first government ever to legalize abortion. The reason that I think this is so important to talk about, especially on a day where we are supposed to honor women, is understanding the origins of these seemingly innocuous things like Women's Day or feminism. Even though this is what International Women's Day comes from, do you think that we should still celebrate it or not celebrate it? I would love to know in the comments your thoughts, because my mind was honestly blown by finding this out.
My mother was arrested for prostitution, and the judge told her she had to leave town overnight. We ended up moving into an apartment on Alexandria between Hollywood and Sunset, which at the time was a horrible, like the worst part of Los Angeles. I got a job at a pizza place in Century City. At the time it was called The Cultured Cow. And it was right where ABC is. Hugh Hefner had his private Playboy Club. The Schubert Theater was above. Andrew Lloyd Webber always had cats. So that was a whole new world to me. At the end of the night, there was always celebrities coming in because they had been upstairs watching a show, would come down. We were the last thing open. One day, a representative with the Ford agency came in and said, "Wow, you would really be a great model. Do you know who Eileen Ford is? I work with the Ford agency." He introduced me. And so I met Eileen. She was staying at the Bel Air Hotel, walking into her room at the Bel Air Hotel, which was a suite. It was just like, wow, it was a whole other world. She looked at me and she said, "Would your parents let you go to Paris?" Immediately I said, yeah, my parents will let me go. For sure they'll let me go. I literally did not know where Paris was. And when I got on the plane from LAX to Paris, I didn't know where I was going. She arranged everything, my tickets, everything. But I didn't know where Paris was on a globe or an outlet. Like, I had no idea.
This culture that has formed, everything having some ideological, political undertone behind it that has absolutely killed creativity and glamour. I think the absolute very best comparison and example for this is the new versus old Balenciaga. Back in the 50s and 60s, Balenciaga was the peak of glamour. It was not only so feminine and stunning, but it was also innovative and cutting edge. It was the perfect balance between femininity and beauty with edginess that just combined to be the epitome of glamour. Which, compare that to Balenciaga today, which outside of the obvious tarnishing of its brand through horrific campaigns and runways, they have produced, interestingly, collections that are actual carbon copies of old Balenciaga designs. The thing is, though, even though these dresses and runways are the exact same copy and paste of the glamorous 50s and 60s designs and presentations, there is something absolutely not glamorous about it at all. Like, how is that possible? How can you just take something that was so glamorous and copy and paste it, and then it turns out not glamorous? Because it's the ideology and the people behind the work is what creates the glamour. And all of that has changed from genuine creativity and love of beauty and women to being purposely contrarian and venerating ugly. Welcome back to part 3 of how I went from Jewish atheist to Catholic in just 3 years. Okay, so after that Bible study, something shifted, like fast. My migraines, gone. anxiety and hopelessness, they started to lift, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. So I kept going back every week, slowly learning how to pray, how to read scripture, and most importantly, how to apply it to my actual life. Meanwhile, college was still online, but even as my faith grew, I just couldn't reconnect with my old dream of working in art. But then, spending so much time at home, I stumbled upon my mom's old Vogue magazines. And bam, it was like flipping a switch. Fashion, the thing that I loved as a kid, came rushing back. Okay, for example, in middle school, between games at my lacrosse tournaments, I would literally hide under a sweater to stream New York Fashion Week on my phone, and I would spend hours curating outfits on Pinterest boards. Fashion was my world. And that passion, though, was put on a back burner, especially in college. And what blew my mind in this process was how finding Jesus actually led me back to myself, to the girl who loved beauty, creativity, and self-expression. And that was the opposite of what I was told that faith in Jesus would do by mainstream culture. So it's 2021. I'm flipping through my favorite old Vogue, mourning the glamour that I felt had faded, and I thought, wait, why don't I just make my own magazine? Style everything myself, write the articles, design the layouts, all of it. And that's exactly what I decided to do. So I put together all these great editorials using my mom's old clothes, and my mom shot all of it on my iPhone. And the deeper I dove into creating, the deeper my relationship with God grew. It turns out that following Jesus didn't limit who I was, but he actually brought me back to the truest version of myself. But still, this was just the very beginning of the journey, and where I was going next, I would not have predicted in a million years. The Our Lady of Guadalupe image is the most miraculous image ever created. It was created supernaturally by Mother Mary herself on the tilma cloak of Saint Juan Diego in 1531. And the image led to the mass conversion of Aztec pagans in Mexico, 9 million of them in just 10 years. What made it so convincing to the indigenous people was that it read in the same way as an Aztec pictogram, meaning that they could decode it and understand it in the same way that they would a piece of their own tribal art. The miraculous nature of this image led to the voluntary and peaceful conversion of so many natives that on some days the friars were baptizing 4,000 to 6,000 people. And one day, 2 priests baptized over 15,000 in a single day. The friars started to see that the native people were not just converting, but they were voluntarily abandoning their pagan beliefs without instruction. For example, they started abandoning polygamy and instead seeking monogamous marriages in the Catholic Church. There were up to 500 couples married in a single day. And the indigenous people would travel in groups of several thousand, getting to the church for confession. Was a phenomenon compared to the Pentecost and the Acts of the Apostles. 500 years later, Our Lady of Guadalupe is still one of the most reproduced images, and some 20 million people per year visit the tilma in Mexico City.